We're going to have an opening. Jan Hill and Betty Carbrandt have graciously agreed to do a traditional opening for us.
Sego se wagwego wat konu horado gano chuni yungyat spoganyatu gano kanyungeaga the guy in the negative gidoro. My name is Gano Shuni. I'm from the Turtle Clan from the Mohawk Nation, and I come from the community of Tyendinaga, which for those of you who are unfamiliar is about 60 kilometers west of here. Do you introduce yourself first?
Seiko Joanjo Hepstone, Yungyaks Wagata Huni, Tyendinaga Tikidoro. My Mohawk name is Joanjo Hepstone, my clan is Wolf Clan, and I come from the community of Tyendinaga as well.
So it's our custom as Mohawks who are part of the Haudenosaunee that when there's any gathering of 2 people or more, we've been given the responsibility to acknowledge and give thanks for everything in the natural world, all that has been provided, so that we can continue to exist here as human beings. And so I'll say a few words of Mohawk and then Betty will say it in English so everybody knows what we're talking about. Okay, and I have to use Cole's notes with my Mohawk because I'm kind of foggy today.
Today we have gathered and we see that the cycles of life continue. We were given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. We bring our minds together as one as we send greetings and thanks to all the people. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to our Mother the Earth. She provides everything we need to live a good life. She supports our feet as we walk upon her. It gives us joy that she continues to care for us as she has since the beginning of time. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to all the waters. Water is life. We know its power in many forms: waterfalls and rain, mists and streams, rivers and oceans. We send our greetings and our thanksgiving to all the waters. Now our minds are one. We send our greetings and our thanksgiving to all the fish life. The fish help purify the water. They also give themselves to us as food. We're really grateful they still follow their original instructions. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to all the plant life that is available to help support our Mother the Earth. We're really grateful they still follow their original instructions. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to all the medicines. We can still go to the forests and the swamps and find the medicines that we need to help our people. And at this time we acknowledge those medicine people who still know how to use those medicines. We're really grateful that they still follow their original instructions. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to all the insect life. They perform many different things on the earth. They help pollinate the plants as they move from plant to plant. And we're really grateful they still follow their original instructions. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to all the trees and the bushes. They serve many different purposes. We use the wood for our fires. We get fruit off the trees. We use some of the trees and bushes for medicines, and we're really grateful. At this time we acknowledge the maple, which is the leader of the trees. It's the first one to wake up in the springtime. So we're really grateful they still follow their original instructions. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to the food and the fruit plants. And at this time we acknowledge the strawberry, which they say is the leader of the plants. We're really grateful they still follow their original instructions and help give our people sustenance. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to all the animal life. The animals give them of themselves for food for our tables and hides to make clothing. We're really grateful they still follow their original instructions. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to all the bird life. The birds have beautiful songs and they remind us to be joyful. And at this time we acknowledge Akwaks, the eagle, who they say is the leader of all the birds. So from the smallest to the largest birds, we offer our greetings and our thanksgiving, and our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to the four winds. They come from the four directions, bringing the, helping bring the change of seasons. We're really grateful they still follow their original instructions. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to our grandfathers, the thunder beings. With lightning and thundering voices from the west, they come bringing the water that renews life.
Oh, I forgot that.
We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to our elder brother, the sun. Each day he rises in the east and sets in the west. He's the one that brings all the fires of life. We're really grateful he still follows his original instructions as given to him by Creator. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to our grandmother, the moon. She's the one that works in partnership with our elder brother, the sun. She's the one that takes care of all the women across the world and helps bring those faces yet to come. We're really grateful that she still follows her original instructions as given to her by Creator. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to all the stars. They help light up the nighttime sky. They also guide us home at night when we're traveling. And it's the stars that we look to when we're getting ready for our ceremonies. We're really grateful that they still follow their original instructions. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to the four sacred beings that have come to help our people through the ages. When we forget how we're supposed to live as a people of peace, they're there to remind us. We're really grateful that Creator cares so much for us that He sends those messengers to take care of us. Now our minds are one. We offer our greetings and our thanksgiving to the Creator who has provided everything we need to live a good life. And we're really grateful for that. Now our minds are one.
You noticed while we were doing the opening that Betty would say, and now our minds are one. That's another purpose why we do this, is so we bring everybody's minds together so that we're all focused on the purpose that we're here for today, and we don't have everything else that's in our minds bothering us. We're just going to focus on the reason that we've gathered today, and that's why we've said those words. I normally encourage people, if you're carrying any extra baggage with you, leave it at the door. When you leave, if you want to pick it up, you go right ahead. I encourage you to leave it there, and Sungwai Diesel will take care of it for you. I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome you all here to Queens, but most importantly, to the land that Queens stands on. And the land that has traditionally been hunted and fished and lived upon and traded upon by the indigenous people in the area. And those people have changed over time and been here at the same time, but most especially we mention the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people, and in most recent history we acknowledge also the presence of the Métis people. So welcome to the land. Now,
Yeah.
Well, welcome once again. My name is Mark Green. I'm in the Civil Engineering Department here at Queens, and I am the program leader for the NSERC CREATE initiative on sustainable engineering in remote areas. And I'm just going to give a quick overview about the program, and then I will introduce our guest speaker, Chief Wilton Littlechild. So I mentioned it's sustainable engineering in remote areas, and what we're looking at addressing some of the challenges, particularly with engineering services in northern remote communities and working with Aboriginal communities, and looking at both the challenges of environment, but also in terms of understanding different cultures. There are two main research themes. One is in renewable energy, and the other in sustainable buildings. So the sort of a conventional definition from the Brundtland report of sustainable development looks at development that meets the needs of the present without compromising future generations, but also think there is even a more traditional definition of that coming from many Aboriginal teachings about seven generations and looking forward not just for the present, but looking after 7 generations in the future. So it's not just a new concept of sustainable development. So something to keep in mind in our program. So this is a program of NSERC. It's a federally funded program, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council. CREATE is a collaborative research and training experience, so it emphasizes more about specialized or different training that students would get than they might otherwise get in a sort of conventional research and science and engineering program. And so it's over 6 years, and we're starting into our 3rd year now, and it's a total of just over $1.5 million in federal funding. So Queen's is the home base, but it's actually a partnership of 4 universities. Queen's here, Royal Military College of Canada, the University of Ottawa, and the University of Manitoba. We also have partners, the college sector, St. Lawrence College, First Nations Technical Institute, and several industry partners, some of whom you'll hear later on from today. We have 4 industry presentations and a number of representatives here today, and also some communities, and we have some local community representatives from our Aboriginal communities here today as well. So overall, so the idea, sort of our objectives, are looking at developing a model for Aboriginal graduate education and for graduate students to understand more about Aboriginal communities and Aboriginal culture, and ideally to create opportunities in Aboriginal communities specifically for sustainable engineering projects, to transfer our research into practical applications, and hence specifically meet the needs of Aboriginal communities. And also as part of that, to have opportunities for training Aboriginal students in science and engineering as well. So we have specific goals, particularly with awards for Aboriginal undergraduate students in our program, and trying to make strategies for having more Aboriginal graduate students as well in our program. So some of the key ideas about the training, that sort of the extra things that we're doing beyond what's in a normal graduate program, is that we have modules that focus on Aboriginal culture, legal and financial issues, modules that focus on development of business skills, and we're looking at some of those in the context of whether it's Aboriginal businesses or working with Aboriginal communities, and also about sustainable engineering, once again trying to have a flavor of what are the applications for Aboriginal communities, etc. Also as part of the program, we have industry internships, community visits, annual workshop that this is part of right now that we're doing today, and we're introducing a design competition as well that will be launching tomorrow. So in sort of overall training, we propose that over the 6-year period we would have 36 graduate students involved. We already have 17 who are at this point, so we're well on our way. Postdoctoral fellows, 4. We actually have had 4 postdoctoral fellows involved already, and 12 Aboriginal undergraduate students, and we currently have had or have 7 students involved in different levels of the program in that. And at least one of our graduate students is Aboriginal at this time. We're trying to look to grow the numbers in that area. So the research I mentioned, that renewable energy, projects in solar, biomass, wind, there are aspects of sensing and monitoring in all of what we do. And sustainable buildings, we're looking at energy efficiency, lightweight building systems, and once again incorporating monitoring and sensing in those systems. I'd also like to introduce a couple of new key people in our program. Sandy Humans is our new program coordinator for SERA, and she's with the Faculty of of Education, and so bringing her expertise for specialized training in terms of doing coordination of the program. And I'd also like to acknowledge Laura Kinderman, who was previously in that role, who now has a full-time position with the university and is not able to continue on in the program coordinator role. So thanks to Laura. And many of you, Sandy may have communicated with you in preparation for this event. I'd also like to recognize Doug Tomlinson as well, who has taken on a postdoctoral position with and Doug's in the front up here in this photo here, at work on his PhD, just completed his PhD and is working to help in the postdoctoral role with SERA. And I'd also, once again, like to thank Martin Noel, who was previously doing a lot of the work for this program. I'm happy to announce that Martin is now an assistant professor at the University of Ottawa. He's not able to be with us here today because of his teaching commitments, but he'll be involved in some of the training activities tomorrow. So I think there's one of our successes of the program already. So for the next part of our session, there are a few seats down at the front if anybody wishes to take them. You're very welcome. So I'm pleased to introduce Chief Wilton Littlechild as our guest speaker for this morning. And he's a commissioner with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that has focused on residential schools and looking at truth and reconciliation about what happened in terms of Indigenous peoples in Canada. Notably, Chief Littlechild was the first Treaty First Nations person to graduate with a law degree from the University of Alberta, and in 2007 received an honorary doctorate as well from the University of Alberta. He's also an accomplished athlete with more than 50 championships to his credit, and was one of the founders of the North American Indigenous Games. He has also served as Member of Parliament and is an honorary chief of the Musqueam, Cree, and at Six Nations as well. So, Chief Littlechild, I invite you to speak.
Thank you very much. We worked at
Oh, we do. Okay, I think, do we have the, does this go? This goes forward
Okay.
and back. Yep. So that to go forward.
Okay. Thank you very much and good morning to each of you. Nistaminanigan, tatamskadnaga. Thank you very much to each of you in my own language. I bring you greetings and thank my sisters for the invocation this morning. It's such a beautiful, beautiful prayer in a way that's very fulsome. And when they mentioned they were from Tyendinaga, the first thought that came to my mind was an outstanding athlete, Tom Longboat, who was a very great role model of mine actually when I was going through school and competing internationally in sport. Today I'm really honored to be able to share with you a story that's been very, very emotional for me at times to experience in the last 6 years as a commissioner. Let me just say first of all that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada is very unique. Unique in the world in a way that most truth commissions, and I think there have been something like 64 truth commissions around the world, this is the first one that was court-ordered truth commission. By that I mean it was not established by government. Most of the, or not, just about all of the other truth commissions have been established by governments. Ours is not. It's a court-ordered mandate. And it was because some brave souls, almost 15,000 individuals, decided they had had enough of an experience that they had. They started suing. They sued the federal government of Canada and 4 churches, 4 mainline churches, who were responsible for administering the policy, the residential school policy. So because of the numbers of lawsuits, the judges, in their wisdom, decided to ask the plaintiffs, the former students, the survivors of these residential schools, if they could settle out of court. So after about 1.5 years of negotiations, there was a settlement, the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. In that settlement agreement, the survivors demanded 4 things be included before they would settle. One of the 4 was to establish a truth commission. Because you see, what happens if you take a case and take it out of court, normally the person who would have had an opportunity to give their side of the issue is taken away from them. And they felt this experience was too important to take away just simply and award a compensation, for example, a financial compensation, of which there were 2 amounts. One was a common experience payment, which meant that anyone who had gone to residential school could voluntarily apply for a compensation on a formula-based amount. Secondly, those that were really severely abused in the residential schools, there was a separate process for them, which is the independent assessment process, where they could go and file a complaint and have a private hearing about their own situation. And then there was a healing foundation that was established as well. So the 4th element was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We were asked, the 3 of us as commissioners, a specific mandate, a very difficult and challenging mandate, I must say. Justice Murray Sinclair and Dr. Marie Wilson and myself. At our very first meeting, we asked each other, why are you doing this? Because for me, I didn't want to do it to begin with, to be honest with you. I thought I was busy enough doing what I was doing in my law practice, and decided no, I didn't want to do it. But when I reflect back now after 6 years, I'm really blessed, very thankful that I had the opportunity to be able to be a commissioner along with my 2 colleagues. So at our first meeting, we decided that this work is so important that we want to consider it as a sacred trust. It's a very sacred trust. The people are putting faith in us to listen to their story about what happened to them in residential school. So what happens to children when you remove them from their parents when they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old? Sometimes a little older, but then you put them in an institution for 10 months out of the year. What happens to those children? What happens to the parents from whom you've taken the children away? We had parents come to us, for example, say to us that September was crying month. This part of the year was crying month because September was when they came to remove the children, they said. Imagine a home, a house with children laughing and crying and playing as children will in the house, in the home, then there's noise in the home. But then for 10 months out of the year, there's no noise in the house. Children's voices are gone. What happens to the parents when you do that to them? Because this was legislated. It was done by a forced measure. I remember a woman crying, saying to me as I was listening, the last thing I remember about my daughter is that I was hanging on to her and the police pulled out one of my arms and the Indian agent took the other one. And that's the last time I saw my daughter. Commissioner, you go find my girl, she said, because I've never seen her again. So it was a very serious bit of work we were asked to do, to find out the truth. Then at a meeting at the Yukon, I heard a young woman get up and say, you know, Chief Littlechild, I see that you have focus on the child taken and the parent left behind. What about us, she said, who came after? What about us children who came after this experience? Those that have experienced intergenerational trauma. What about us? So it was really important then, I think, from that point on, that we not only look at the children and the parents, but the children after, grandchildren, for example, of parents, grandparents who went to schools, and what impact did they go through as children. So this is a unique commission. First, that it's established by a court, and secondly, it's the first one in the world that focuses on children of all the truth commissions. And thirdly, it's very important you understand the distinction of a government established truth commission and one, in this case, that was established by the survivors. The government did not pay for the commission. It was the survivors themselves who said, if we're going to settle this court case out of court, we want some of our money to go to establishing a truth commission. So it's very important because of its independence that this was funded not by government but by the students themselves, the survivors. So it's unique in the world. So after the 6 years, it was actually initially a 5-year mandate, if you remember, but then we were asked to extend by the courts another year. So the first commission, if you remember, the 3 commissioners resigned. So we're the second set of commissioners that came in to take on the role. And we were launched by the Governor General, the former Governor General of Canada, Michaëlle Jean. Her Excellency hosted us at the Rideau Hall in Ottawa. She was also our first honorary witness. I'll come back to the honorary witness role because it was very, very important to us. So because the survivors were the owners in a way of this commission, it was important that we asked them to advise us in our work, to guide us as commissioners in how we should go about our work. For example, it was a very culturally relevant commission in a sense that we did not hear from anyone unless there was a medical support, there was a spiritual support, or a cultural support behind that individual or around that individual because of the trauma. Some people said, you're asking me to tell you something that I've been trying to hide for 50 years or 60 years. So it's very, very traumatic. I remember one community, we had hearings in a curling rink, in the lobby of a curling rink. And we had an old woman in front of us telling her story. And in the north, as you know, you're working in that area, remote communities, isolated communities, sometimes a small community. But we had over 150 people come to the hearing, which meant almost all the community was there. So this old woman was speaking about her experience. And I think now, thinking back, that it was probably the first time any of the community members heard her story, because she broke down as she was telling her story. She started crying. And not just crying, shedding tears, but wailing in a way like as a little person would, a young person. So she was going back to the time she was 6 and 7 years old, being abused and telling her story. And a man on one end of the room started crying with her. And then another person over here started crying. Soon the whole room was crying. The whole room. Everyone was crying because of the pain of the story. So it was difficult and it was important, and we were lucky that we had the support team around us so that the health supports went out into the room immediately. We called a halt to the hearing, and we had the spiritual supporters and the cultural support go to individuals and take them as a small group to talk to them and ensure that no one was hurt any more than already. So it was important that we had these survivors from across the country advise us, because it was they who said, don't go into this and open up a wound without making sure that you've got health support behind the individual or around the individual. And sometimes it's not the traditional mainstream medical support, but the traditional cultural and spiritual support that was important for the individual. So thankfully, we had these experts in a way that, because they had lived it themselves, they had lived the experience themselves. So in the truth gathering, the statement gathering, we heard from people in over 77 communities. Actually, someone else calculated that we were probably in about 300 different communities to gather the truth, about what happened in these residential schools. We were ordered by the court to hold 7 national events. So we had 7 national events, and one of the main purposes and objectives of the national events, at least according to the court order, was to try and educate Canada, to publicly educate Canada, because this has been said to be the darkest, saddest, and most known about history in Canada, the residential school history. So the courts felt it was important through the survivors that we do something to try and inform Canada about this history. So we held 7 national events across the country. We held hearings for over 240 days, actually, of direct full day hearings from individuals. We heard from almost 7,000 individuals. Because remember, this was over a period of 150 years, and we had 130 years, and we had 150,000 children go through this experience. Well, in that case, some people say that happened so long ago, why don't you just forget about it? Well, the last schools closed in 1996. So it's very recent history, and yet most Canadians don't know anything about it. So it was important that we tried to inform the Canadian public about this. 2/3 of the individuals who came in front of us said that, I want the world to know my story. So it was a public disclosure. Some said it hurts me too much what happened to me. I don't want anybody, including my children, to know about what happened to me. So I want my story kept private. So we've honored that. We've honored the ones that wanted to have their story kept private. So with others, they said, you can use my story if it'll help Canada learn about what happened. So in the national events that we held, you will see that the logo on the left-hand corner there, those are the 7 fires. Each one is a fire that represents one of the sacred teachings of our people. So we use these teachings as a theme for each of the national events. For example, the first national event that was held in Winnipeg was based on a teaching of respect, a very fundamental teaching of respect. So we tried to have a thematic approach to the national events. The second one, very importantly, was about courage. And you all know, those of you who work in the North or are from the North, I think it takes courage alone itself to live there, but there's a lot of other needs of courage in the North. So Inuvik, being the host, was a very important setting for us to focus on the teaching of courage. The third one was in Halifax, and I thought this would be the hardest. I thought it would be the hardest one to do, but I was happily how did I say, how I was happily told that I was so wrong, because people came forward and started talking about love. You see, when you're taken away as a child, 5, 6, 7 years old, from your parents, and your parents had gone especially to residential school, love is not something we shared. Parents told us, I came out of that school not knowing how to be a parent. I know punishment, because I was punished a lot, but I didn't know anything about love. So if I don't know about love, how can I share it with my children, they said. So love was a very, very important theme, because of the fact that we came out of those schools not knowing how to parent, not knowing how to express love to children. But people standing up and saying, for the first time in their life, you know what? Today I begin my healing journey and I love myself. I love myself. I love me. And that's important for me to be able to say that, because now I can tell my children that I love them. So love as a teaching in Halifax was a very important theme for us to go another step on this journey. In Saskatoon, the old people, the elders, said to us, we want the theme to be based on truth, because we have a story to tell about treaties, the truth about treaties, and we want that known, they said. So truth was a theme, a teaching. Humility, the teaching of humility was the basis for the hearings in Montreal. Vancouver was on honesty, and the last one in Edmonton was on wisdom. So we took one of each of the sacred fires in that logo and took a sacred teaching as a theme for each of the hearings. So we felt important that it be culturally relevant, this Truth Commission. Because some of the other Truth Commissions, unfortunately, didn't have any kind of cultural relevance. Probably the most famous Truth Commission is the South African Commission. And we met with 2 of the commissioners. They came to our hearings. And one of the commissioners from South Africa said to us, we wish we had done this. We wish we had done what you did in Africa for the Truth Commission over there. Because this was a good way, they said, to do it. So from outside, we had a good pair of eyes to guide us as well. So over the years, we had, in the national events, 155,000 people came. And we know that from registrations. But many people didn't register. As a matter of fact, in Edmonton, there was a fire. You know how they have limits for rooms about. The capacity was 9,000. So 9,000 people registered, but the others didn't. We broke the law a little bit there, but it was okay. There was nothing happened. So in a way, but we had regional events as well, where we had 5,000 in one regional event in Victoria, and then 1,000 in Whitehorse, because people wanted to have a regional hearing as well. One of the very, very important elements of our work was what we called an education day, because children often said they didn't know anything about this because they didn't learn anything about it in schools. They said, I went to school, but I didn't learn anything about this history. I don't know what a residential school is. So we set up a day where we invited children and youth to come together for a full day and learn about the residential school history. They heard stories from survivors themselves, describing their life and their experience. So we had over 14,000 students come. Now they're sharing that story of what they learned out there across the country. It was interesting that we had a lot of interest from the international community. People in 68 different countries watched us on webcast. And there's been over 250,000 views from the hearings and our national events. So there was global interest in our work. And I'm proud of the fact that there's one community that also stepped up And just to give a quick example, it was the sports community. The Edmonton Oilers hockey team dedicated a game to truth and reconciliation and residential school hockey because of its importance to many children, the sport of hockey. So they dedicated a game for the first 5 minutes of the game on the Jumbotron. There was a video that was shown about residential school and residential school hockey. But the minute the puck was dropped and the game started, they have 360,000 fans that follow the game. They were immediately informed through the media about TRC, so that we were trying to get this out in public, more people to know about it. So these countries, sometimes it would be a room like this. We don't know how many were in that room, but it was counted as one place. So there was a lot of good global interest, because as I said earlier, there have been about 64 truth commissions, and there's new ones being established, 2 recently. One in the state of Connecticut. For the first time, there's a truth commission looking at the situation of child welfare. You heard on TV last night, as a matter of fact, I was watching a show and an interview guest, Dr. Marie Wilson, pointed out that today's rates of child apprehension in Canada are much higher than the days of residential schools. More children are being apprehended today, Aboriginal children being apprehended today than there was at residential school. In my province, Alberta, when we started the work, it was 68% of all those children apprehended are Aboriginal. And you heard in the news a couple of days ago, one of the directors in Manitoba is on a fast because of the numbers of children being apprehended in Manitoba. Well, when we finished our work, it's now 69%. So the rate of child apprehension in my province has actually gone up. It hasn't gone down. So we need to do much more work in this area. So to help us, of course, then we looked at experts across Canada, those that are very highly regarded, highly esteemed Canadian leaders. For example, former prime ministers, former auditor general, former governors general, former lieutenant governors, business leaders across the country, people with the Holocaust experience, for example. They're now honorary witnesses, and they make a public commitment. They made a public commitment that they will do as much as they can in their own circles of influence to inform Canadians about this history. So we honor those honorary witnesses, because once our work is done in December, actually it's done as of June, but we're still doing our final report, which will be released in December. These honorary witnesses will then pick up the work to make sure it continues. If you look at the documentation of the work that we did, actually, the very first report that we issued, they came for the children, was a sort of a preliminary history of residential schools. And it's a publication called They Came for the Children, available right away. And in that study or report, we concluded very early that the residential school policy, if you remember the Prime Minister's apology when he issued it on behalf of Canada, he said the stated policy of the residential school history was to kill the Indian in the child. To kill the Indian in the child. So we thought we'll look at that and see where we hear about it, where we see it. And we concluded early that this policy was a direct attack on our languages. When you hear adults tell about their childhood and say to you, to us, when I spoke my language in school, I would get a pin stuck on my tongue because I was not to speak my language. I was hit. Things were thrown at me, an eraser from the teacher or whatever, a book, because I was speaking my language. So we felt it was important to point out that this was an attack on language, an attack on our culture, because we were not allowed to try to express our culture. culture in a way that was important because we grew up with it. Young people said, back then, they were young, when they think back about their experience, they said, you know, my childhood was really good. I remember my first 6 years of my life, I was so happy. I remember that. Until one day in September, everything changed. The day I was taken away to be put in a residential school. So when you got there, the first thing they did to you was take your name away. Give me your name. Because now you're a number. You're given a number instead. People said the impact of that, your name being taken away from you, in many cases a traditional name, like you just offered your traditional names to us, so important, was not allowed. From now on, you're number 7, or you're number 20. And that's how you lived in the school. Number 65, come here. Pick up that pen, you dummy. Why did you do this, 65? So the loss of identity to children, we're talking about children, was very severe when that was done. So the culture was not allowed. Your hair was cut if you had braids. Your traditional clothing was taken away. Recently, 6 pairs of moccasins were found. 6 pairs of little moccasins. A girl's moccasin, 6 pairs. And a grandmother laboriously prepared those moccasins for her granddaughter every year as a gift to go to school with, not knowing that they were going to be taken away right away. But somehow somebody kept those 6 pairs of moccasins, and they were found recently. So the impact on one's culture when you do that to children has been really important. So people say to us, well, now I don't know where I belong. I don't belong in the white community. I don't have a name, I have a number. I don't belong in my community because I don't know my language. It was taken away from me. So they're lost. Then you wonder why people get into alcohol or drugs. Parents told us, you know, sitting in my home, in my living room for 10 months, and I don't hear my children's voices, I turned to alcohol. That's why I did that, to kill the pain. So the impact was really evident right away in our hearings. So you're not only attacking the language and the culture, but the family. And because you attack the family by removing the children, you're attacking the community. That's how the policy of killing the Indian in the child was being carried out. Sadly, the government contracted 4 churches to do that. 4 mainline churches. Catholic Church ran 70% of the schools. The other 30 was divided among the United Church, the Anglican Church, and the Presbyterian Church. So this history is important now to be taught in schools because people still don't know the story. We gave an interim report to test out our recommendations to see if they would get any attention. So in the report, for example, we called on all provinces, the governments, federal government included, to support and endorse the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We put that out there as a recommendation. So early on in our work, we were doing this for a designated purpose. A commemoration fund was established by the government because it was important not to allow anyone to be able to say 50 years from now that this didn't happen in Canada. This didn't happen in Canada. So it's important that we have these commemorative projects now across the country. For example, there's markers where schools existed, where the schools actually were built. There's markers across the country there now. We have documentation that we've gathered over the 6 years because people said to us, I want you to know my story, but I can't tell it to you because it hurts too much. But I'll sing you a song. And in that song, you'll hear my story. Or I'll write a poem or a book. I'll do a play for a stage on theater. And you see these plays now, you see these books of people telling their story through that medium. I'll do a painting, and in that painting you'll see my story. So we've gathered all of this now, information about the truth, and we're housing it at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, which was awarded to Manitoba, the University of Manitoba. Because we still have brothers and sisters out on the streets that have not got the courage yet to come up and tell their story. So we think it's important that an opportunity goes forward so that others can tell their story. So now it'll be continued by the University of Manitoba, because we're finished as far as gathering the stories. But University of Manitoba will do that. And we're going to put all of our stories with them, all the artwork we collected, all the poems that we collected, all the songs we collected are all going to go to University of Manitoba. Because sometimes in the future, a grandchild might want to know about their grandfather or grandmother's history in residential school. They'll be able to access that now going forward. Researchers might want to do studies about this, so they'll have an access to that information, so long as there's consent given to it. So when we gave our summary report in June, we issued a publication called The Survivors Speak. I remember an old man tell us, I want my story to be told. I want the whole world to know my story. So we've gathered these stories, and now they're in a publication, their stories as they told them to us. And it's a book that we released. What we learned in this process, there's another publication, and we've come up with a set of principles for reconciliation in that publication. You saw the summary report that we issued in June, the 94 calls to action. One study was done on framing the debate, in a sense. When a commission like ours is done or a report is established, usually the words that are used are recommendations or conclusions or summaries. A report was done on what is the effectiveness of those words, each of those words. Did you know that the word recommendation is the easiest to ignore? So we call ours calls to action, because that's what it's going to need. It's going to need action to follow up on this work. So the second one that was most readily ignored was summaries and conclusions. So we thought it was important to frame it a little bit differently. So we issued 94 calls to action in different areas. So quickly about the reconciliation principles. When you read our report, by the way, it'll be released on December 17th, look with the lens of these principles when you read it. First of all, that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is a framework for reconciliation. It's a framework for reconciliation. When we issued our report, the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon made a statement, first commending Canada for doing this commission, but also he called on us to use the declaration as a roadmap for reconciliation. Recently at the United Nations, a report was released, and you have the document number there, at the Human Rights Council by the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, consolidating all the calls to action relevant to the UN Declaration. So there's one document available for that now. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, in the statement that he made in the opening of the Human Rights Council, called on Canada to, with urgency, implement these calls to action. So we're getting support at the highest level, really. We heard premiers after their meeting in Goose Bay come and give the report at the National Press Conference, saying that we regret that the Prime Minister was not here, but notwithstanding that, we as premiers endorsed the 94 calls to action. So that was important. in terms of support. In Alberta recently, as you know, there was an election. A new government was elected. And one of the first commitment they made with regard to Aboriginal issues was to implement the UN Declaration. So there's some political support that's out there now. Chiefs in their assemblies, chiefs are saying, we will do this in terms of implementation. So the UN Declaration is very important to guide us in that. The second one is that First Nations, Inuit and Métis have treaty, constitutional, and treaty rights that must be recognized and respected. I think that's self-evident in terms of what that means, that treaties must be recognized and respected. But I think an additional point to that is that they need to be looked at and understood as to how Indigenous peoples understand treaties. Not just what's written in black and white on a document. Because you see, in my case, our treaty story is carried in the songs. There's a song that's sung every time for a treaty meeting. It carries the story of treaty. There are ceremonies that we hold because that was a part of the treaty process. Our language, of course, carries the story. There's a ceremony done every 2 years by one community because the women keep the treaty story. I was in my office one day and I got a call from someone. I answered yes. He said, Mr. Littlechild? I said, yeah, it's Willie. He said, I want to invite you to come and witness something. And I said, well, to witness something? Why don't you just bring it to my office? I'm thinking like a lawyer, right? Bring it to my office and I'll witness it. He said, no, you have to bring your sleeping bag. I said, what? Bring your sleeping bag, he said. So I thought, okay, this is different. So he gave me an address of where I was supposed to go. And what it was they wanted me to witness a 4-day and 4-night ceremony of transferring the treaty story between one set of women to another set of women. That it was their turn to carry the treaty story. And it's a ceremony, 4 days and 4 nights. So it's carried on, the treaty story. But you see, you need to put the two of them together to know that to have a full story of treaty, you need to have both sides. So not only should it be respected and honored as written, but as understood by Indigenous peoples. Then you'll have a full understanding of treaty. Reconciliation is a process of healing relationships. That requires public truth sharing and apology, commemoration, and redress of past harms. I thought early on in our mandate, it was very difficult to ask us to do an effort to gather the truth and then go to reconciliation. Because it's a process and a spectrum in a sense that, yes, it's important to get the truth, but then you have to have an apology, which we got. But what we didn't get is an opportunity to forgive. So that process and step is important. Then healing is important. Because when you have the truth and the apology and the forgiveness and the healing, then you can have justice. People will have a sense of justice. Then you can go to reconciliation. It's a spectrum, in my view, that takes those steps. So it was hard to just go from truth to reconciliation. So it's a process of healing, the reconciliation. It requires action to address destructive impacts on Aboriginal education. Language and culture we talked about already. But on education, people have said, of course, you've heard it, it was education that got us into this mess. But it's education also that'll get us out of that mess. So it's important that we learn about this history, not only in schools, but in universities like this setting here. About the health, the impacts of the policy on health. Why is it that we have, once I was speaking and I was trying to speed up like I'm trying to do now because I want to give you time for some questions. I said, we have a challenge in my community, it's called diabesity. And I said, well, I think I just created a new word. I said, I was trying to say diabetes and obesity at the same time. But there's impacts on health. You see it especially on mental health. Mental health is a big challenge for us because of what you did to children, or what was done to children. First of all, to deny their identity, but also to expose them into situations where you're cramped into space where it's not healthy to have that many people in a room, because one sick transfers it to others. The number one killer in residential schools was TB, tuberculosis. So health challenges that we have today need to be looked at with the historical background. Child welfare we talked about. Administration of justice. Last week I had an opportunity to address 500 judges, over 500 judges, about this story, because they need to know what happens to people when what was done to them, and the judge faces that individual. If they know about the story, what went on with that person, then I think it'll be better in terms of what happens in courts. Economic opportunities and prosperity. This is your area that I think you're going to be going into in terms of engineering. Reconciliation must create more equitable society, closing the gaps in social health and economic outcomes. Last night, the national chief was on TV talking about the gaps. And one of the gaps he talked about was the education gap, that because of a financial cap on education money, that it's not improving the situation. The economic opportunities. I saw in the paper yesterday something like $260 billion would be available to Canada if you close the gap in education. So sometimes we need to talk in those kind of terms to get attention, but the point is that we need to close the gaps. We need to have more healthier people like myself. 6, all Canadians are treaty peoples and share responsibility for mutually respectful relationships. One time I was asked to speak to a Chamber of Commerce, and the worst thing you can do, Mark, is to tell somebody, come and talk whatever you want. So they told me, come and talk to the Chamber of Commerce, but whatever you want. I said, okay. So I said, well, I'm going to come and talk to you about your treaty rights. And he said, what? Your treaty rights. I said, oh, interesting. So I went and talked to the Chamber of Commerce. A lot of the business community was there. And I talked to them about their benefits that they gain because there's a treaty in existence. They said, what do you mean? Well, you get to have your own government. You get to have private property. You get to have your own business. You get to own whatever you want, make your own laws. That's not bad for $5 a year, right? So the important point, though, is a two-way street. It's not a one-way street when we make treaty. It goes both ways. So Canadians need to understand that they're treaty people too. And there's not only benefits, but responsibilities to uphold the treaty agreements. So we're entering that. The perspectives of Aboriginal elders and knowledge keepers regarding the concepts of practices of reconciliation are vital to long-term reconciliation. Now just think for a moment, pause for a moment at the words that we heard this morning. The Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk, the Thanksgiving, to the water, to the birds, to the insects, to the trees, all of that. That's what it's about. That's what... One time I was at the United Nations and an elder was asked to speak. And I've told this story before. I think there was 189 representatives of the world in the room. And the elder said to them, which one of you is going to argue for my brother, the fish that swims in the water? Which one of you is going to argue for my brother, the bird that flies? Or who's going to argue for my brother, the four-legged, who walks Mother Earth but then dies so that we can live? Who among you is going to argue for clean air and clean water? because that's where we're the same, he said. Boy, you could hear a pin drop that day at the UN when he said that. But on that day, the world shifted in terms of environmental consciousness. People started saying, yeah, that old man has a point. Who among us is going to do that? So there was an indigenous elder that came to the UN that started the consciousness about environment and the need to protect it. Environmental laws were started. So thank you again for reminding us of this importance in your invocation. That's the kind of knowledge I think that would help us in schools, so children would learn not only about why we're lazy, why we're no good, why we're drunks. It's important to know also what we contribute. I was asked to go to a chairperson at the UN, and they said to me, go and ask her because we want to open a meeting with an invocation. So I went to her and I said, our elders, I come with a mission to ask you for time so we could open a meeting with a prayer. She looked at me and said, Mr. Littlechild, you know we don't pray at the UN. Well, it's kind of like just an invocation, with Thanksgiving. And how long is that going to take, she said. Well, I don't know, it's up to the elders. So they came with 4 drums, right? Prayer song. I think it's going to give us about 30 seconds or whatever, but that was just a warm-up. So I think some of these practices, like reconciliation to us, there's a town, my neighbor town, in a city. It's now a city. It's in the old days, it's 10 miles away. I don't know what it is in metrics. What is it? 12? Anyway, 16. Yeah, that's right. Wrong audience, eh? Wrong audience to admit my ignorance. But it's sadly mispronounced. It's usually called Wetaskiwin, Alberta. But it's actually a Cree word, Wetaskiwin, which means having good relations. And that's what reconciliation is about, having good relations. So I think sometimes if we were to rely on our traditional knowledge keepers, not only about our sacred ceremonies, but life in general, it might help us along this path. Aboriginal cultural revitalization and integration of Indigenous knowledge systems, oral histories, laws, protocols, and connection to land are essential to the reconciliation process. I think this one is speaking to you loudly, to you here as engineers or prospective engineers that are going to work in isolated or remote communities. I think this one talks to us that Indigenous knowledge systems are important because one person said to us, we weren't just removed from our parents, and we know what happened to us when that was done. We were removed from the land. And that too has an impact. So he said to us, you want to heal? Go back to the bush. He said, go back to the bush. And you want you to go there and put tobacco in the 4 directions of a tree and talk to that tree. But more importantly, he said, listen to that tree. Listen to what the tree is telling you. So you see, these notions of environment and traditional knowledge that our people have, I think it's important for us, why should I say, I'm not even an engineer, but it's important for all of us as professionals to listen to those kinds of advice. It's essential in the reconciliation process that we do that. And of course, reconciliation will require political will, joint leadership among us jointly, trust building. I remember the first meeting I went to was a very angry meeting. And the people said to me, why should we trust you? When are you going to quit me as a commissioner? Because the first 3 had stepped down. I've told my story 7 times now. Nobody believes me. What can you tell me that convinces me that you're going to listen to me? So I think it took us a little more than a year just to rebuild the trust in our community about our hearings. And of course, accountability, transparency, and investment of resources. There's such a thing as economic reconciliation. or reconciliation through economic development. And I think we're starting to see that notion being discussed. It'll require sustained public education, like you're doing here these next 2 days. Public education, dialogue. I came back from the UN and I have to report to my elders all the time when I go and I inform them what happened. I said, I just came back from the UN and dialogue almost broke out. Because of the way the process was being conducted. So we need dialogue and youth engagement among each other about the history and legacy of residential schools and about treaties and Aboriginal rights, the past and present contributions of Indigenous peoples to Canadian society. Because as I said, when I went to the chairperson to ask if we could pray at the UN, every meeting now is opened with a prayer, but it was the elders who caused that. But also more importantly, in a sense that the world is used to looking at rights in two bundles: economic, social, and cultural rights, and civil and political rights. But guess what? Now that you look at it a little more closer, you'll see there's a new bundle being talked about: civil, political, and spiritual rights. Again, it was elders who contribute to that, humankind, in my view. So we should look at what we've contributed to Canadian society. Tom Longboat was suspended because he was accused of taking money. He was declared a professional. City of Toronto offered him a wristwatch because he won the Boston Marathon. They declared him a professional. Went to the Olympics. The US team said, we're going to boycott the Olympics if Tom Longboat is allowed to run. So they threatened to pull out of the Olympics. Challenges to him. But you know what? Those incidents caused Canada to organize its sports organization across the country. The Canadian Athletic Union resulted because of Tom Longboat. Nobody thanks him for organizing Canadian sport. Yes, by way of a protest by others, but that was his contribution. Something children need to learn about, I think. So, these are the principles we've come up with. And very quickly, our final report and our calls to action. I see my brother Mark here is up, so I better wind up. So the history. The history of the schools now we've got recorded. One thing we were not told to do, but we did it because we heard about children who died in schools, children who didn't come home from schools. So we did a report on the missing children. You hear stories like, I'd never been on a plane before, and there was a float plane waiting for us at the dock, so we were all taken there and put on a plane, and they flew us to Ottawa. And the pilot of that plane later came to us and said, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just told, go pick up some children. But what I remember and what bothers me to this day is the children's voices crying all the way from that community to Ottawa. Never been on a plane before. Initially, they were excited because they're going to be on a plane. Then they're put on a train for 3 days to Edmonton. Put on another plane to Inuvik. 2,500 miles away from home. Little people. First time ever. So, what happens when you do it? Some try to run away. They froze to death, some of them, trying to run away. Some drowned, trying to cross rivers to run away from school. Some were beaten up and died in schools. But the point is that the parents didn't have a chance to put closure to that death of that spirit, the child. Didn't have a chance to have a feast and sing the traveling songs, to have prayer and offer thanksgiving for the spirit and wish them well on their journey. Parents didn't have that opportunity because they didn't even know their children died. They never saw them again. They didn't know where they were buried. But now, luckily, because we did this study, we've identified over 4,000 such children by name, where they're buried, what they died of, so that those parents now can have that closure. So it was important that we do this story as well about the missing children. The school legacy issues, of course, we talk about education. This is our report now that I'm kind of giving you. Culture and language, we talk about that. Spirituality, the health, justice, governance, and poverty. Poverty sometimes was mischaracterized. The children were not being abused by their parents. They were poor, yes, but they were being well taken care of by the parents. But because they were poor, they were taken away. So we talk about poverty, the missing and murdered Aboriginal women. You know that story, of course. First time I raised it at the UN, now one is enough, one is too many actually. But when I raised it at the UN for the first time, it was only 250 that were missing or murdered. Now last night I heard on the news it's up to 1,500. RCMP alone in their report said it's over 1,200. So that situation is going up. The jails are going up in terms of incarceration by Indigenous peoples. Child welfare is going up. Why is this happening? We need to make that link from residential school. Let's go back to that link and make it. That's why it's happening. That's why it happened. Because people were asked, for example, in one jail, how many of you have been impacted by residential school? 100% of the inmates raised their hand. So we need to make these links, and it's important that we do that, and hopefully our report will help that. And the last one, of course, is reconciliation. Now, I know you can read this, so I'm not going to go through the calls to action specific to education. But one thing I'll say is this. We need to teach this history in schools, all schools. Alberta as a government made a commitment that from now on, kindergarten to grade 12, all the schools, post-secondary, the colleges, the education faculties will teach about the residential school history. Will teach about treaties. Will teach about the Crown relationship. They'll teach about Indigenous spirituality so that we get to know each other a little bit better. So this is, the calls to action are related to that. We met with the ministers of education. For example, we called on them to make sure that they review their curricula of the schools and see how they've incorporated, if they have, residential school history into the curricula. So same thing for universities. We call on the levels of government, both provincial and federal, to do something, but not only on them. We also address the chiefs, our leaders, as to what they need to do about reconciliation. You see, again, like, how many of you actually have tried to walk on a railway track? Anybody? So yeah. Oh yeah, good, okay. So you know that you can walk on a railway track like that, and eventually you'll fall off a bit, right? You'll step aside. But did you know that if your partner goes on the other rail and you're on this rail and you hold hands, you can walk for miles together. You know why? Because you're supporting each other. And that's what we need to do in this area, reconciliation. It's going to take sustained efforts. Nobody said reconciliation was going to be easy, but we need to do it. So it's calling on leaders to do that. Here's my school. Hope you can see it. Here's our potato field. We used to have potato fights there, you know. There's the cow barn, there's the hog barn. So we kind of kept our own way of life in the school. Some people have called it child labor, but anyway, there's where the nuns lived, the girls lived, the classrooms. Here's where the boys lived. Here's our swings. We made a lot of games out of that. You know, we used to play baseball. We have this game of baseball. You'd go to hit the ball. Even if you got struck out, you'd run to first. Like a slide on first base, like the Blue Jays, eh? You get thrown out. Just get up, keep running to second base. Get thrown out at second, go to third. Get thrown out at third, you run home. You got to run. But also, you had good exercise. So we made a lot of games up in that school. But here's the same school, a different view, but you can't see it, I'm sorry. But there's a fence here that goes there, barbed wire fence. So you say, well, big deal, barbed wire fence. But it was an electric fence. That's what kept us inside. This is my home for 11 years. So, it's not going to be easy, the reconciliation. But just as you could on a path of railway, on a path of reconciliation, if we support each other, we can do it. Hey, thank you. Okay, sorry, took so much time.
Thank you. I think that we will have take 5 minutes for questions, and then we can have our break, and then we're going to come back and continue the discussion with our panel. So do we have some questions from the audience?
Yes.
Chief Little Child, it's a pleasure to listen to you, and thank you for coming.
Mm-hmm.
I've been an educator for 30 years, and I think your presentation is the one that I think enjoyed and listened intently for the last hour. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
A couple of days ago, I attended the National Chief's lecture on the education gap at the University of Manitoba, where I teach.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about the gap and talked about the residential schools, but he also talked about the Indian Act as being one of the causes of that gap. It's very, for us as educators, it's very important that we know many of the background, but we cannot replace the experience that you have brought to our presentation today. Who would be in the best position to teach our students? We're looking for people that will bring in that experience and teach our students with sensitivity and the experiences. Obviously, our teaching universities and the teachers going through teaching colleges and universities don't learn this. And it will take some time to deliver the message that you have outlined. So, who else would be in the position to come and teach our students and deliver that message? Will it be from the communities? Will it be the elders? What advice would you give the presidents and the deans of the universities to expedite that process?
That's a very important question, and I think that you answered it in a way by the question. I think it's important to look at the traditional knowledge keepers, the elders, to have space for them to come and speak to students. Also elders who have the treaty history. Perhaps it's former chiefs, but people who are willing to share those stories, to create space for that. But in order to do that, I think there's one thing we need to look at carefully, and that's the word expert. Because sometimes in courts, for example, our experts are put on a stand, our elders, and they're cross-examined by saying, what makes you an expert? Where's your degree? Can you produce your degree to show us that you're an expert in this area, this knowledge? So I think we need to be sensitive to that requirement to allow the knowledge keepers to be able to share their information without having to have that degree, I think, because they have a degree. It's called experience. So open space for elders, spiritual keepers. I think those are some of the best teachers that you'll have because they've lived it. They've lived the residential school history. They've lived the treaty story. Because remember, this is not old history. 1996 is when the school closed, last schools. So there's people out there right now. Some of them are still very angry and probably won't, offer that possibility. Maybe they would, to come and explain to you why they're still angry. But the important thing, I think, is to create a little space for our knowledge keepers, our sacred knowledge keepers, and have them present to students. Because when we did the education days, that's what we did. We brought survivors in and they talked to the children and the youth. And they had a lot of good impact because they were coming from their heart, their experience, and that's what they were sharing. So I think it's being able to create that opportunity for and there's many in the communities. There's many in the communities. Where they found that was in Saskatchewan, where they taught treaties in schools. First they started with a junior high school, and they brought traditional chiefs that were knowledgeable in the treaties, and they taught treaty to the students. And then they went to high school, and then they went back down to the elementary school so that children could learn treaty. And you know, when they did that, and the elders and spiritual knowledge keepers did that story sharing, the attitude in the playgrounds changed. The bullying went down because children were for the first time knowing that they were the same, that they were treaties too. So in a grade 2 class of the hood, they call the hood, the poor town, the poor part of town where all the Indians live. Grade 2 class, and they taught them a song. It's called We Are Treaties Too. Then they went to the rich part of town, grade 2 class, and they taught them the same song. Christmas time, they invited all the parents into the gymnasium of one of the schools. So the parents came, they didn't know, they thought they were going to go and see their children have a Christmas concert, which it was. But they brought these two classrooms together because they knew the same song, We Are Treaties Too. And they sang on a stage. Never saw each other before. But the impact of that was phenomenal because for the first time, people understood that they were the same in terms of treaty. But it was the elders, the knowledge keepers, who made that happen. So I think if we're willing to allow that kind of happening in schools, it would be, especially university at your level, it would be helpful, I think. Sorry for a long-winded answer to a short question.
So one question here and then
I have something to bring up. I had a court case way back in 1990 in Aurelia, Ontario, and I won my court case by what happened to all the kids in the residential household abuse. There you are.
Thank you.
I can thank all the lawyers who are on our side. Every people in this town who had helped me, asking me how I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
The mental health people didn't know why I was fighting it so I can be proud of myself for standing up for every boy and girl up north in Aurelia who were transferred to Smith Falls and Chadden, Kent.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say thank you all for being kind. Even my friends,
You're writing, Harold.
all my friends, all the Algonquins who care.
Well, we're the ones to thank you as well for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for what you taught me.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Bill Fontaine taught me a lot too.
Right. So, thank you very much, Mark, and to all of you, thank you to each of you for this opportunity. Hi, hi.
Thank you. And
Thank you very much. Hey.